Well, returning to the disgraceful news this morning, Prime Minister Scott Morrison announcing Australia's borders will remain shut to who knows when. Live now is Andrew Cooper, the CEO of Liberty Works, where they are currently in court trying to overturn Australia's strict border restrictions. Andrew Cooper, great to see you. How are you, mate?
Yeah, good morning, Rowan. Thanks for having me.
OK, so you were in court last week, High Court, full bench of the High Court. You are trying to get the borders open so that people can leave Australia. Why, and will you succeed?
Well, it was the full bench of the federal court.
Sorry.
And the full bench is important because it's winner take all. If we can win this particular case, then the outbound border, not the incoming border, but the outbound border will open up if the adjudication goes in our way. Why did we do it? Well, we did it because, A, we think that the Health Minister does not have the power to shut that particular border to all Australians. But B, and possibly the most important reason, we think it's just simply morally wrong to not allow Australians to leave. Rowan, 8 million Australians are born overseas. 8 million Australians have strong emotional ties to other countries, to family members in other countries, often elderly parents or siblings or children that are in other countries as well. And it just seems entirely cruel that these people would be denied the right to either return to their home of origin or to see those family members, particularly after 15 months.
Rita.
But these measures seem to be largely popular with the electorate. There was a Lowy Institute poll that was commissioned and that showed about 40% are happy with Australians being restricted altogether and having to seek permission to leave. And an equal number said that if once you're vaccinated, you should be able to leave. What do you think is going to happen if you are successful, given how popular these restrictions are? Will the government just keep fighting you all the way to the High Court?
Well, it's difficult to know, Rita. We would hope that the government would accept, if we did win, that they do not have any legislative power on this particular matter. It's quite possible, as you've suggested, that they could introduce further legislation, but they'd have to get the support of Parliament for that. And I think this is going to emerge as a significant political issue for the government. Look, the analogy here is basically the hardest border in Australia is the West Australian border with Premier McGowan. It's wildly popular over there, but there's no thought from the McGowan administration that would stop Western Australians leaving that state to travel to Sydney, for example, to see a family member. Sure, if you want to return to Western Australia if there's a COVID outbreak, you're subject to the rules of quarantine when you return into that state. But here we have a national government that's restricting people from leaving the country. No one is arguing, we're certainly not arguing, that you shouldn't be subject to quarantine restrictions when you return. Now, it's wildly popular at the moment, but I think I got this feeling, Rita, that it's really, we're essentially a fearful nation at the moment, and I'm not sure why we are, because, I mean, let's face it, the COVID has had a relatively minimal impact on this country. So I would think that over time, with a little bit more thoughtfulness, that maybe this measure of pulling the borders down, preventing people from going overseas, I think that would be seen eventually as being a fairly acceptable and measured response.
James.
Andrew, how did you react to the statements from the Prime Minister reported in News Corp papers this morning, essentially saying that we're going to stay as Fortress Australia, or as I like to say, Ozcatraz, for the considerable time being?
Yeah, no, I mean, I'm appalled, James. I mean, when they first closed the borders, it was essentially 2 weeks to flatten the curve, right? I mean, I'm aware of people couples that were overseas, one returned back to Australia and their European partner stayed in Europe and thinking that there'd only be a month or two. And here we are 15 months later talking about many years that these couples are going to be separated. And this is the cruel thing about these measures. And I'll just share with you a couple of comments from the literally thousands of comments I've got, emails. Sarah says, the border closures are keeping me from the love of my life. Kevin says the travel ban is arbitrary and adversely discriminates against Australian citizens. Another person says, my mum was prevented from seeing my grandmother for the last time and to support my grandfather during the death of their mother because of this cruel rule. And this is the thing, right? This was brought in initially as a temporary measure, and as Milton Friedman says, there's nothing more permanent than a temporary government program. This is exactly what's happened here. And I mean, they say 2022. I mean, seriously. I mean, they've been telling us, you know, the first of all is going to be October this year. Now it's 2022. I mean, when is this going to be lifted?
Now, Andrew, you're the CEO of Liberty Works and you basically fight for individual freedoms. You would have thought the most basic individual freedom is to be allowed to go and visit your parents, for example, if they're dying, or any other reason. Any other reason. You should be able to leave the country as you see fit and then take whatever risks you choose abroad and then do whatever you have to do to come back in. That would seem to be the most basic common sense. For a Conservative government to be stopping this absolutely is just beggars belief. But tell us briefly the legal situation. So you went to the federal court, you did that last week, they're deliberating at the moment, but what does the case rest on, Andrew?
Well, I mean, essentially, we didn't argue whether there was a health... There's a lot of ways that this case could be prosecuted. We basically narrowed our application down to whether the government actually has powers to ban every Australian from leaving. We acknowledge that the Biosecurity Act appears to be able to confers powers on the government to stop individuals from they can put restrictions on individuals' movements, but the legislation, to our reading, does not say that it can just put a blanket ban on all Australians from leaving. And it comes down to the definition of what a person is. This is sort of getting technical, but the legislation refers to restrictions on a person. The Solicitor General, the government, are saying, well, that also means every person. And we're arguing, well, the legislation does not mean that. It just means individuals or a series of individuals. You know, at a black letter reading of the law, our barristers are very confident that it would be found in our favour. And certainly the intent of the legislation when it was originally drafted was not to put a total ban on travel. But who knows how the judges are going to read this? So you know, we wait with anticipation and have our fingers crossed.
Rita.
Well, this can't be a cheap process for you. Who's funding the legal action, and do you need community support if the fight goes to the High Court?
Yeah, we definitely. So it's not cheap, as you well know, Rita, and so we did get a number of significant donors to help us out for the High Court matter. I mean, Liberty Works is a small volunteer-based non-profit organisation, so we do need the support of donors. We have a small GoFundMe requirement, which we have funded. But if we lose this, as you've alluded to, Rita, we will be taking this to the High Court because this is about as serious as you get impost on freedoms, I think, that you can imagine, the right to leave a country. And Rita, I keep banging on about this, but the thing that really appalls me about this is that the act of leaving a nation, any person leaving Australia, in no way endangers those Australians that are left behind.
Right. Exactly.
All it is the person who leaves to go somewhere else, they are taking a risk, but they're in no way endangering anyone else except themselves. And this is to me the total craziness of this particular piece of legislation.
Andrew Cooper, Liberty Works. People can go to Liberty Works website and help. Great work that you always do, but you're absolutely right. This is fighting for the freedom of individual Australians against the collectivist bureaucracy who say, oh, let's just impose this one rule on everybody because it makes the bureaucrats' lives easier. What a disgrace from a Liberal government. Andrew Cooper, thanks so much.
Thank you, Rowan.